would have been in the early 1900s. They were transferred to small towns, I think, throughout California, San Joaquin Valley and the area around Monterey Bay. They lived in many different towns, and she, again, took that experience, which had a lot of hardship in it, because she was very lonely and isolated and totally out of her milieu, and struggling with a husband and a growing family. And she found that it expanded her understanding of humanity, because she met many people throughout these towns in California who were extremely kind to her and extremely helpful. And she needed that kindness and caring, because as it developed, her husband was an abusive spouse. He beat her physically and quite severely. She gave birth to 3 daughters in, I think, fairly rapid succession. Her husband was struggling with his career as an Episcopal minister, and he had this hidden private life of being a wife beater.
Mm-hmm.
And the church, terrible temper. Yeah. And the church knew about it. The authorities in the church, the bishop knew about it, and it was an extremely difficult situation. And they wanted Alice to leave him. She did not want to, because it would ruin his career. It was a very difficult situation, and she writes so touchingly of all the help that was given to her by people in very quiet ways to sustain her. But I think the turning point came when he threw her down the stairs, which is interesting, because when she was a girl, one of the ways she tried to commit suicide was to throw herself down the stairs. Well, sometimes I think that's a sign that one has really offended one's higher self, because later on she was married to someone who tried to do the same thing to her. It must have been some kind of compensation for having
some type of karma, maybe.
Yeah.
But then eventually they had to separate. Walter had to.
It just got so bad.
It got so bad. She had to go up and live by herself with her 3 daughters. So she was essentially a single mom with 3 kids, and
one talent, as her upper class background had prepared her for one way to earn money, which was to make lace. Not a great deal of demand for that.
Very useful talent, and in Southern California at that time, in the early turn of the century. But it got worse. I mean, to make ends meet, she had to find money somehow. She had go out and work, and she
raised chickens?
She raised chickens, but she also ended up in a sardine canning factory, and she learned how to pack sardines. One of the best sardine packers around, they said. So she could rise to the top no matter where.
But even though she attempted to commit suicide when she was younger, when she left that noble class, so to speak, she seemed to never return to that frame of mind again. She always met every obstacle, no matter what was demanded on her. She would work in a sardine factory or do whatever was necessary. After that, she never gave up on life, and from what really struck me is that every obstacle and challenge that she went through in life, she always had the viewpoint of, well, I'm here for a reason. This has to do with my development in some way, my strengthening, perhaps some type of karma. That God has allowed me to be in this situation for a particular reason that maybe I don't understand at this particular moment, but perhaps it'll fold during my life. I really think a lot of her strength might have come from that, and I was really amazed by her ability to be open-minded too. So many of us find a sense of security by always remaining the same, and it seems to give us all a sense of self-definition, and with her it wasn't that way. One of the unique qualities I found in her book was that she was always open to change.
In fact, she writes about that in the early part of her autobiography. She wrote, "I have lived many incarnations in one. I've moved forward steadily, but with exceeding difficulty, psychological and material, into an ever-widening field of usefulness." She said, "I want to show that in each cycle of experience I did sincerely try to follow a leading coming from within, and that when I did, it always meant a step forward in understanding and a greater ability, therefore, to help." What I think is interesting about that passage is that she She says that, yes, she progressed forward in understanding and in acceptance of life, but it came at a price, with exceeding difficulty. It wasn't easy for her, but there was something within her that drove her forward, and through these severe personal hardships to I suppose, expand her heart and her understanding of humanity. She writes so inspiringly of how one barrier after another was broken down in her consciousness by her contact with the whole range of humanity, from the soldiers in India to the people in the sardine canning factory to the most ordinary townspeople. She realized a depth of goodness and of generosity in people that she couldn't have achieved if she had stayed in her own social class.
Yeah, she certainly did, and I feel the same way about that. By the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Inner Sight, and we're speaking about Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey is the founder of the Lucis Trust organization. It's a worldwide organization. Alice Bailey is the author of 24 volumes of very profound philosophical books. I think you'll find them interesting. There are so many different subjects that she goes into, and a lot of it has to do with coping with life and understanding life, understanding oneself, handling fear, coping with fear, how to deal with fear, coping with anxiety, how to overcome challenges, even ideas such as how to make changes, become different, become the higher, more or less in alignment of the highest within us, the divine within us. And so if you'd like to order her books, I would really recommend that you start off with the autobiography that we're talking about today. We're speaking about the autobiography of Alice Bailey. And so give us a call at 1-866-695-8247. That's 1-866-695-8247. Or if you need an easy way to remember it, is 1-866 NY Lucis, Lucis. Think of New York Lucis. 1-866 NY Lucis. Our website is www.lucistrust. That's one word, Lucis Trust. That's www.lucistrust.org. And our email is newyork@lucistrust.org. So once again, give us a call at 1-866-695-8247. You're welcome to buy the books at Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com or Borders, but you get a 10% discount if you buy the complete set of Alice Bailey books through Lucis Trust. And I like this thought. Sarah mentioned a thought from the Alice Bailey books. One of the things she says, Alice Bailey, in her writings, one of the things that I seek to bring out in this story is the fact of this inner direction of world affairs, and to familiarize more people with the paralleling fact of the existence of those who are responsible, behind the scenes, for the spiritual guidance of humanity and for the task of leading mankind out of darkness into light, and from the unreal to the real, and from death to immortality. And that really says a lot about the writings of her books. And she, at around age 35, Alice Bailey experienced a considerable change in her consciousness. And that excerpt from the book relates to this. What happened and how did this awakening affect the rest of her life?
Well, it was an interesting awakening. It was about age 35, as you said, and that's a pivotal year for a lot of people. It was for me, I'll tell you that. And because it's the end of a certain period of cycles of 7 years each. And so around age 35, she came across what is called Theosophy. And she met a couple of ladies, elderly ladies, who had worked in Theosophy for many, many years. And she started going to lectures and meetings about theosophical subjects. And something clicked in her consciousness, and she really began to awaken to the possibilities that the spiritual life was much deeper than she had been believed up till this time.
Well, she mentioned that her faith that she had as a girl and young woman, which was a very narrow kind of Christian faith, had not been sufficient for her to cope with what really was the tragedy of her life. A young mother with 3 very young daughters, a husband who was so abusive that she had been forced to separate from